Good morning.
Morning.
Nice and fresh this morning. Had a email from our good friends in Vermont, the Shaoshan Temple, and it's minus 22 degrees in rural Vermont right now. So if you're feeling cold this morning, just think about that. I was trying to think, I was like, so I don't know, it's probably in the mid 30s or highish 30s now. So between our temperature and like a hot summer's day is the same number of degrees difference between what we are and where Kenzan and the Shaoshan community is right now. So a little bit very cold. They have like big wood stoves and stuff, so they stay warm. So this week I'd like to continue speaking about the mother of the Buddhas. And as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I believe it was on the 2nd when I started this series of talks. And I had mentioned that during the beginning of the year, there's always a lot deep honoring of Prajnaparamita, who's also known as the mother of the Buddhas, and is here the iconography to the Buddha's left is the personification of Prajnaparamita, or the perfection of wisdom. And that there is a kind of epithet for Prajnaparamita, which is Buddha Mother, Buddha Eye. And our temple name is Buddha Eye, and we have this deep relationship with kind of veneration of Prajnaparamita. And so in January, that's always a big part of what's happening ritually at the temple, but for me personally, it's also an important time of my own personal practice. A kind of deeper reflection about Prajnaparamita is always happening this time of year. I really appreciate that. And just like any real teaching, there's no bottom. There's not, like we have this way of studying things where we think like, well, I'll study this and I'll get it. But the things that you really want to study, there's no getting. Right? You only go into them deeper and deeper. Like if you have a good relationship with another being, another person, or a tree, or a cat, or anything, it's not about getting it. It's not about getting them, right? It's about a deepening understanding and unfolding of that relationship. And really, the teachings in Buddhism are the same way. They're not just something which we will get. That's nice. There are times where something becomes clear, we see more deeply into something, and that's wonderful. It's very helpful, and gives us some confidence and helps us readjust our life. So I'm not saying that there's never any kind of understanding. That's really important. But the goal is not to get it. The goal is to deepen our relationship with that teaching so that it can live through us more completely. And the teachings have no end in that sense, which sometimes feels daunting, because it's like, really, there's another thing, there's another thing, there's another thing. But actually is an expression of freedom. Just like our life really is endless possibilities, which can be super scary, right? But also is what allows anything that's going to happen, is to be in that spaciousness. So on the Sunday mornings, we chant the Heart Sutra, which is one of the shortest versions of the Prajnaparamita teachings. And that starts out with Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. And in terms of this kind of deepening relationship, some of you have only heard that phrasing a few times. Some of you have heard it thousands and thousands of times. Some of you, it moves through you on a regular basis. You recite it as part of your practice. But in any case, when you look at a teaching like that, or you're receiving a teaching like that, there is the kind of narrative way that you can read it. This is a story about Avalokitesvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, who's deeply practicing, deeply coursing in the perfection of wisdom. This practice of the Mahayana, of the great vehicle. And coursing in that wisdom, Avalokitesvara looked at the world, looked at all things. The 5 aggregates are what everything is made of. What anything we could experience comes about because of the five aggregates. So Avalokitesvara looks at the whole world and sees emptiness. And emptiness here, really important. That's not like existential angst emptiness, right? It means empty of self-nature. It means that none of the phenomena which Avalokitesvara is encountering in this viewing is independently existing, solid thing. And the way in which Avalokitesvara sees, clearly seeing is our translation. I've been saying illuminated seeing, or a seeing which illuminates, can see that all things are completely luminescent. They're not this solid, opaque world, but they're translucent and alive. And in seeing that way, suffering is gone. So this is the story. So we hear that narrative, and then we get closer to the different parts. Avalokitesvara. Why is this teaching on wisdom, the primary actor in this teaching on wisdom, the Bodhisattva of compassion? The Bodhisattva of compassion is the main character of this exploration of wisdom in this most revered Prajnaparamita text. It's so simple, but so beautiful. You want to relate more deeply with wisdom? You want to see differently? You're going to have to feel differently. You're going to have to face things with the integrity of compassion. And so each part of those teaching, we start to develop a different relationship when we look into it more deeply. Avalokitesvara. It's not just, oh yeah, there's this person, there's this being, Avalokitesvara, and they did this thing. They saw with luminosity, and then suffering was released. Avalokitesvara is the subject of the story, right? Of course, Avalokitesvara is the subject of the story, but also we should let Avalokitesvara visit us. We should know the Avalokitesvara of our own heart. Not only think about this as a story that's out there. It's right, moving through us. This deep coursing in prajna. Does it mean to deeply course, to deeply move with or through wisdom? And this clear seeing. You know, I was on a personal retreat this week, and I like to go to a place I won't tell you where it is. Because I really love it. Not too many people, I don't want too many people to go there. Oh, anyway, it's Cape Blanco. It's one of the best places on the planet. You should go there. But don't tell anyone else. Just keep it to this room, maybe to the people on the internet. Anyway, it's far enough away from things that people don't just go to nonchalantly. You know, it's like it's a kind of place where you have to go. And it's just a marvelous place, as many places, if not most places, are, if you pay attention. And so many days not speaking is really wonderful, even for someone who speaks as much as I do. And the way you can see something changes when you're not translating it through language, when you're not putting it into a linguistic structure for the purpose of communicating. Seeing just, it can be different. So here in the teaching, we see a word like clearly seeing. Okay, that's part of the story, but it's also something we should just consider very directly. What is seeing? Literally seeing, but also all the faculties of the sense world. Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, feeling. In Buddhism, thinking is a sense organ. Thinking and feeling, consciousness. And what of the world that is seen, heard, smell, taste, touch? So as these things sink more deeply into us, again, not just as a narrative, but as the facts of our life, the teaching can start to inform us on a deeper level. What's the difference between wisdom and delusion? Now, this is the fundamentals of Buddhism. Wisdom and delusion. we live a life that's animated through delusion, there will be suffering. When we live a life that's animated through wisdom, that suffering can be relieved, it can be released. And the wondrous quality of being can be the basis of life for ourselves and for other beings. This is a kind of basic setup of Buddhism. And as I've been saying in these talks, prajna, seeing through prajna, is seeing through emptiness, is seeing through interbeing, it's seeing through the non-objectification. Sometimes people will say non-duality. It is seeing in such a way where the world is not divided again and again. It's seeing the wholeness of things, but not insisting that they all get squished together. That things as they are, as the beings and individuals that we all are, there is a wholeness there. We don't need to change something. This is the path of wisdom. And the path of delusion is a path of objectification, where I make things into objects again and again. And I can study that on a rougher sense, like in what way do I treat other beings? What way do I treat people? I'm getting a coffee at the coffee shop. Is the person I'm getting a coffee from just a coffee server to me, in which I demand their existence to fit into that box? Well, of course I'm getting coffee from them. That, if they're like, I'm not just a coffee maker, I'm not going to give you any coffee, then that's not going to work out probably, right? So there's some functioning that's happening there. But with what heart do you do that? How about the coffee itself? Well, it's just a cup of coffee. It was either good or bad, medium-ish. I prefer the good one, which I'm right about, by the way, which is the good one. Not everyone agrees with me, but, not everyone can be right. So. But the coffee itself, it's not just a cup of coffee. Right? It's not just an object of my awareness, an object of my consumption. It is an invitation. It is a gift. Right? It is a generosity of my being which can encounter that cup of coffee, the person serving the cup of coffee, the entire interaction, the generosity of my seeing, which can allow that to be something which is freeing. The more that it turns into objectification, the more that it becomes confining and painful. There's no way you're going to get a good cup of coffee through that kind of objectification. It might be good, but it's going to fade real quick, whatever satisfaction comes from that. Yeah. And then in fact, this emptiness or this interbeing, it's not just the emptiness of things, it's the emptiness of our seeing itself. Right? What I was saying last week of the fundamental frameworks, the emptiness of how I see, from where I see, the capacity to see, the subject of the story, me, is also empty. It's not just the things I'm encountering which are empty. The seer is also empty. And I got to say, this is the hallelujah of Buddhism. This is the good news, because it means everything's totally alive. There is nothing which stands outside of the aliveness of being, because I'm not standing over here saying this, not that, this, not that, this, not that. This here is also totally open. And whatever it is that I encounter with a deep and sincere heart speaks back to me. So this kind of review of what I've been talking about, the reason I think it's so important is that I would say the primary reason that people come to the medicine of Buddhism in contemporary North American society is because we're interested in becoming more mindful. We're interested in having a life which is not so crazed by all of the different things that our life is crazed by in the modern world. This is a deep affliction for us. I just feel like there's not any room. Like what a sigh of relief we all had when COVID came. I mean, we were scared. We still are scared. A lot of problems. But remember that? It was like, oh, you mean I could just get a stop? okay. A few weeks of that was pretty nice, you know. I mean, for some, I don't mean to make light of it. For some, it's really hard. Like, how do I make my life work? And especially for people who have children and then we're going to school and then like livelihood. And there's a lot there. But for many people, there is a kind of little bit of a sigh. Like, oh, things just stopped. A little bit like a snow day. I love snow days. I don't think it should only be schools. I think every institution adjusted like a snow day, except for temples. And, you know, the snow days, just like everything stops, you know, and even the sound kind of stops, you know, because it's all getting absorbed into the snow, right? We crave that so much, and it's right that we do. I'm one of those people for a number of years was really grumpy about Buddhism always being translated into mindfulness or awareness. I was like, there's a lot more there than that, but that's all that anyone would talk about, you know, and it's kind of would take me off. Well, I got over it, more or less. Right? But what I want to say is this mindfulness practice, this awareness practice, is a compassion practice, and it is a wisdom practice. It is a practice of the great vehicle. It is a practice of overcoming suffering in a deep and profound way, not only for myself, but for all beings. This is the standard of Mahayana. It can't be just a practice that makes my life better in a limited way. It has to be a practice which is liberating for myself and for others. And so all of these practices are more comprehensive than our idea of calming or centering or clearing away difficulty. Right? And that calming, that centering, that clearing away difficulty are all gateways. They're all profound, powerful gateways of prajna. Right? They're fundamental gateways of Buddhism. So, you know, like when I get a little bit grumpy about it always being about mindfulness, you know, I'm kind of running away. Well, it's like, you know, of course it's about mindfulness. Of course it's about mindfulness. We can't get away from that. That is a central teaching within Buddhism, particularly within Zen Buddhism. But in what way do we regard what the practice of mindfulness is, or how do we regard awareness, or how do we regard meditation? You know? That becomes really important. So I gave people some homework last week. I don't know if anybody remembered it or did it, but what I'd asked people to do was to take some time and just when there's some quiet and to rest your attention on something, or to just allow your attention to rest on something and continually uproot the conceptualization of what it is that you're putting your attention on. So once your mind says, oh, this is this, then uproot it. Like, ask the question, what? You know, what is this? What is this again? And then see what happens there. I'm curious, did anyone take this up? Did anyone find anything interesting? I was doing it a lot this week, but I was on retreat, so it was nice. Anyone find anything?
I have an old cat.
Yeah.
He's 18, and he's becoming more and more feeble.
Mm-hmm.
So though I tried to focus on what really the question that kept coming is when.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not just churning of, you know, when. Yeah, how far does it go, and what does it look like, and,
Yeah.
and what's my role, what's my responsibility
Yeah.
in that?
Yeah. How is it being with what's the cat's name?
Chuli?
Chewy?
Yeah, Tchuli.
Tuli.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Tuli. With Tuli, when you're with Tuli and you're actively practicing that kind of uprooting of, well, this is an old cat and it's gonna die at some point, and we just all know that, and like all the kind of ways that you just create a story and hold Tuli in that story. When you're actively uprooting that, how is it to be with Tuli?
I love him.
Yeah.
I've known him longer than my husband.
Yeah.
I've had him longer than I've had my house.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he's been with me through so much, but
Yeah.
he's also a cat, so
Yeah,
how much
yeah.
are they ever like really with us?
Yeah.
You're just, you know, celebrating his independence and just curiosity about what his life is and what it has been.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you never really know.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Now think about all that's there. You know, all of that. And the more time you would be with Tuli in that mode, there would just only be more and more. And the significance of this cat's life becomes very transparent. Right? So this is kind of the point that I'm making, is that there's a transparency there, which is very different than the opaqueness of the cat as an object of your life. Now we do organize things through saying, oh, okay, this is a cat and not a human, not my husband. Sometimes it could be a trade-off. I get traded off for the cat at my house often. I think she's cuter than I am. I'm pretty sure she is. We do organize things according to those categories. But if we look a little deeper, there's something much more transparent there about the significance of a being in this case. And that transparency really deeply informs our life. To pay attention to this cat is not just about creating a blank slate, kind of where, oh, I'm going to be very calm. Right? I'm going to be very calm, and my mind's going to be very at ease. And in the calmness and in the ease of my mind, this cat's going to become kind of insignificant. This is oftentimes, I would say, the way we approach a thinking about calming down or centering. But what we're practicing in mindfulness or awareness or in meditation is actually just the opposite of that. It's not the detachment that comes from being able to know, oh, this is a cat, and I know it's a cat, and so I can just say, oh, it's a cat, and Tuli, and yeah, I love you and all, but, you're a cat. Then just kind of receding into a sort of fake equanimity, because your equanimity at that point is based in objectifying your experience. Doesn't mean you're using necessarily. You're not, making Tuli smelt copper for you or something. But your mind is using them, right? Your heart is using them to let you know who you are in this kind of separate way. That's what I mean by objectification. You take some time to take that off, and there's a whole world that starts to appear there. Another thing you'll find is it's much easier to allow your attention to rest on something when you're engaging this practice, when you're actively uprooting your view of what something is, the name you've called it and what you're holding it in. In fact, I think if you pay attention to this, the moment that you really solidly decide what the thing is, you can't really see it anymore. You see a picture of it, you hear a picture of it, you feel a picture of it, but the aliveness of the thing is gone. Right? That's what I mean by it becomes opaque. Now, what the Buddha Dharma offers us is a life which can be lived through this. Can be lived through this coursing. This is Avalokitesvara, seeing clearly, seeing with illumination. To meet Tuli is to meet a whole universe of light, which is showing up as this cat. How amazing. That's the eye through which Avalokitesvara regards the world. And you can see why this is an eye that is about the heart of compassion. Because there's deep meaning, there's deep import and significance in that seeing, in that kind of meeting. This mindful living is about compassionate living, is not just about a mind that feels really cleaned up. Although that's nice. You ever heard the term mental floss? Heard someone refer to meditation as mental floss once, and I was like, that's pretty good. But maybe we should have like heart floss and body floss. It's not just up here. It's not only cranium. It's like the whole thing. So that's nice. You'll clean up. You should clean up. Do the dishes. But there's going to be more dirty dishes. You don't clean the dishes for the purposes of dishes never being dirtied. You clean dishes because dishes are useful for eating and for the celebration of, receiving nourishment. That's another way I could say this is I encourage you to come to meditation, to come to these awareness practices, to calming, to centering, to clearing, with a prayerful attitude. I chose that word very carefully, a prayerful attitude. And that could mean a lot of different things for you, depending on how you're organized religiously. But I would say in the direct way, be prayerful to what it is that you encounter, to the beings that make up your life. I was reading a book yesterday, just started a book in the introduction. There was the author had been spending some time at a monastery in Northern California, a Catholic monastery, and he had taken a group of students to this monastery, and the abbot was showing them around in this monastery, and showing a talk about their life, as monastics. And he had been a monk for 40 years, living in the cloister of this monastery. I think probably he left the monastery sometimes. Some cloister you never leave, right? But I think his life was one where he could leave, but that's where he lived. Most of his time was spent there, and so of course you can see these students must be very interested in this. What a weird life, 40 years in this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place, but so much silence and so much simplicity. And so one of the students asks him, says, if you had it to do it over again, would you do it again? Would you choose this life? Chastity, poverty, the simplicity. And the abbot says, yes, I would. He says, I have 4 brothers. And he said, when I see them, I could see that all of our lives are very, in some way, totally different, but in another way, very similar. We're all kind of came to the same place. My life's not any better than theirs as a monk, but I would choose this. They had their struggles, I've had my struggles. And then he pauses for a moment, and he says this beautiful thing. He says, but I would do it with more generosity. A generous spirit is a mindful spirit. A generous spirit is a spirit which can pay attention because it's not in resistance with what it is encountering. In fact, the teachings of Prajnaparamita, the kind of curriculum for Prajnaparamita is known as the paramitas, the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections they're called sometimes, or the 6 crossing overs, the 6 ways of getting free, the 6 liberating practices. And what's the first one? It's generosity. It's the very first one. So when we talk about, and these 6, they're not independent. I mean, the rest of Buddhism, right? There's nothing independent, but they all work with each other. You don't get one without the other. They're like a net, and all the nodes in the net rely on all the other nodes of the net to work. And so if you talk about mindfulness or concentration, which is the 5th of those perfections, right? You've got to have generosity. You have to have, I would say here, kind of like carefulness or ethical precision. You've got to have patience. You've got to have energetic commitment. And then you can start talking about mindfulness. You can start talking about awareness. So if we study awareness, we have to study all of these other things. And if I were to choose one to study, If you could only do one, do generosity. Do that one. They all will come along. You can't actually only do one. But if you felt like, patience, I just don't know, and this and that, and I've done things in my life I'm not proud of, and I feel like I'm not a worthy person, or I'm not an ethical person, or what, practice generosity. And what I mean by generosity here is a generosity of spirit. Of course, generosity is how do we share material things with other beings, completely. But that is only a reflection of a way of being. It's so easy. The abbot goes on in this article, and he says to these students, it's so beautiful. He says, it's so easy to be critical. It's so easy to turn the world into your critique. He says, I could have easily written 5 books on the critique of the world. And he said, and it easily 10 books on critique of the Catholic Church. He's dedicated his life to being a monk in the Catholic Church. You get to shut the world down. You get to shut it down, and you get to shut it in to your knowing through critique. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have critical faculty. I don't mean that. But if you look at the opposite of the generous spirit is the one that is continually in that realm of trying to hold the world still through critique, through a kind of critical mindset. Again, very important to have a critical mind. I don't mean that. But when you do that holding, you say, oh, I know what this is. And then you can be right. And in that rightness, compassion disappears. The world becomes your object. And so this abbot was saying, I would have done it with more generosity. Because that generosity of spirit, which then allows us to pay attention, the significance, the meaning of phenomena become transparently clear there. And then our action can be decisive in a different way. So, while you're studying this practice of clear seeing, which again, you can sit down for meditation, practice it very directly through meditation. And say you just pay attention to your breath. A very common way of practicing meditation is to bring awareness to your breath. In what way do you do that? Do you say, okay, breath, sheriff's back in town. You're going to do things the way you're supposed to do things, like a good Buddhist, okay? Breathe out longer than you breathe in. And I'm going to make sure this happens. That's what we do, right? And then it's like, I think I feel clearer. I think I feel better. I think, that we're doing that. I'm making, fun, kind of like a cartoon of it, but you're doing this, guaranteed. So watch for that. Watch your own kind of critique of yourself. Because you see that kind of critique of yourself also allows you something. It allows you to objectify your being. And in that objectification, you can hold something still. And that gives you a certain kind of power, but you give up something. Things become opaque. Their significance and their aliveness disappears. So there's another possibility. You want to pay attention to your breath? Actually pay attention to it. Just like you would that 18-year-old companion. You would, maybe they want to be held, maybe they don't want to be held. You have to ask the question. If you just go grab them, they might be like, leave me alone. I'm 18. It feels funny to be held, Or it might be like, oh yeah, please hold me. But you don't know without actually compassionately engaging, right? So this is the same for ourselves. Compassionately engaging your breath, the awareness of breath. There's a deep significance in your breath. There's a deep meaning. There's a lot your breath is going to teach you. It will be very transparent, but come with that heart of generosity. through this kind of illuminated seeing, the womb world of the bodhisattvas is continually mirroring the Buddha eye. So this mother of the Buddhas, this eye of the Buddha, they are not separate at all, right? In a way, just different words for the same personification of wisdom. But here I would say that it's like a mirror and a mirror. Our capacity to see, the aliveness with which we see, and the world which is seen are like that, two mirrors facing each other. And that world is like a womb where every phenomena is a teacher. Every phenomena is a bodhisattva, is a being of awakening, which is there to illuminate and be illuminated by the eye of the bodhisattva, of the awakening being, which is your seeing. This is the kind of esoteric world that this type of practice leads us into. But I don't want to say esoteric in any kind of way that's like, oh, it's not for me, you know. So many people think they're not mystics. I never met a single person who's not a mystic. You know, at least when you're born. You know. So there are these realms. They really do, that you're really living in that womb of the Buddha. That womb world is really all around you all the time. And so practice, when we bring this prayerful quality, this generous spirit, it can start to reveal itself, and it reveals itself through these moments of clear, illuminated seeing, which then you cultivate. You come across one, it's your treasure. It doesn't mean you can hold it just for yourself, because it's not something that can be held. But it's a treasure which now is inviting you into another discovery, another discovery. This is the quality of the path which Prajnaparamita is offering us. So, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next week, but it'll be something along these lines. Yeah. Anyone has any questions or comments?
Joe?
Hi.
I don't have a question,
Mm-hmm.
but just wanted to, I'm curious what you have to say about this. Leah and I went skiing on Friday, cross-country skiing.
Oh, beautiful.
And the conditions were, snow conditions were totally lousy. But it was beautiful snow skate, and we're up on the road to Gold Lake, and the sun was shining, and beautiful. And she was ahead of me, and she stopped, and I hadn't done my homework yet. And I just thought, I was noticing the trees, and saw this branch, and it has some snow and little droplets that were glistening, and I started to, oh, so beautiful, you know, noticing the beauty of it, and like, just said, just let go of all that, and just gazed at the branch with no words or commentary.
Yeah.
And I forgot about the question, what? Because I didn't ask what. But after some moments, some time, and just seeing it, and just was like, this, of course, we are there together. There was no separation between me and the branch.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, of course, how could it be any other way
Right.
than that? So I don't know what the what is, but.
Well, it can just be like extra. You don't need it.
Yeah.
It's just it's like a thing you can bring, just to help uproot. But you're doing that, so that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. Something in that I don't want to take away. I have nothing to say about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And the one thing to notice in what your story is that you released the grasping onto beauty. This is really important, especially living in Oregon. And if you like to go to nature, there's so much, nature teaches us so directly. Really everything does, but there's a way we can accept that teaching. through nature so much more readily. We're so adapted to knowing the truth of it in those places. There's a grasping after beauty which really limits this. And you can see it in the kind of, I'm looking around to see if anyone has something with an REI label on it. I don't mean to like diss REI, but a little bit I do. It's like a little bit like the kind of REI, outdoors enthusiast thing, which is, we miss something in that kind of excitement that we bring to it, or we have the capacity to lose something. And of course it's fun. Oh, go skiing, it's like, oh, it's so wonderful, it's so beautiful, and you just feel good. I don't mean to draw away from that, but there's something more fundamental in the awareness there that if we never attach to, it becomes very easy to objectify the very nature which we find so beautiful. And all of our projects to protect and to save and to conserve can get pretty, they can't find their real alignment because they're caught up in this kind of objectified beauty, as opposed to what you're talking about, which is the seeing their significance. And I think we all have experience of that. And part of the cultivation of generous spirit is to really appreciate how that is in your life. It's not all about becoming someone different than you are, right? It's about appreciating how that is in your life, and then giving over to it more completely. Thank you for sharing.
Hey, John. I've been reading Kaz Ta-Nehisi's translation of the Heart Sutra, and he talks about, in his translation, there is no achievement, there is no realization. And I think back when you were talking about the Buddha's story, you left it off when he's underneath the tree, and he's saying there is no wisdom, there's no achievement, and there is wisdom beyond wisdom. And when I think that he was trying, the Buddha was trying, what you're saying was the Buddha was trying to figure out this using his intellect. And when he sat beneath the tree, two things happened. One was a person brought him milk, and another person brought him thing. He understood. So is that the beginning of wisdom beyond wisdom?
Yeah. This wisdom beyond wisdom is also generosity beyond generosity.
Yeah.
It's patience beyond patience. It's ethical living beyond ethical living. It's vigorousness beyond vigorousness. It's mindfulness beyond mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's all of those things. And so in the case of generosity isn't just about us giving, right? That generous spirit isn't just about how do I give things to other beings or people or things, but it's also how I receive. It's two ways. It goes both directions. And so the Buddha's receiving of those alms to support life is a critical change, and it came through generosity. Generosity beyond generosity means that we don't then just say, oh, it's the generosity, and then make a thing of the generosity and try to identify, locate, make function the generosity. The generosity has to be open in the same way that tree branch with the drops of water melting off of them in the sun. In the same way that any of this makes it opaque, the same thing happens with generosity. When generosity becomes a thing, it becomes opaque. And something can happen there, even something good can happen. But it's not the freedom which the Buddha woke up to, because the generosity taught him about generosity beyond the generosity. And then there's not the kind of shutdown.
And Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva is then part of Buddha nature? Or is a Buddha, is a separate being?
So we can say both. things can be, or I would say they just, not that they can be, that they are. Things are both diverse and singular at the same time. But from the perspective of objectification, we need it to be one or the other. It either needs to be like Avalokitesvara and the Buddha, or Avalokitesvara needs to be an aspect of the Buddha. It needs to be one thing, or it needs to be two things. But wisdom tells us actually it can be both. Or it's not even quite right to say that there is even a being in the first place. But that's because the seeing of Avalokitesvara is can be personified, but is not limited to the personification. We can personify that clear seeing as Avalokitesvara, but that doesn't mean that Avalokitesvara is limited to that personification. And that's all kind of a little philosophical. But this is the thing. You love Avalokitesvara. And she loves you right back. And so we don't have to make a problem. Hi. Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you can talk about, sometimes I think when we are practicing, and I think Buddhist language, I think does this well in both hands, that our experience of practice can be beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and it can also be painful.
Mm-hmm.
It can have both aspects.
Yeah.
And I noticed for me, especially I've been away from the temple, I've been very sick.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself in some knots.
Mm-hmm.
And last night I had a dream where I was in like trench warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And these beings who are attacking the trench, their guns were living creatures.
Mm-hmm.
They were these living, weird, alien-like things.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think something that I often turns my heart from opening up to the aliveness of the world is a feeling of attack by the pervasive aliveness, in contradistinction from likely my very shut down heart and world in objectifying things. I want it in trenches that I can know and understand, and the world is bleeding in, totally alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, it seems like you touched upon it today by having a heart of compassion while we practice, but can you talk specifically about working with the kind of feeling of being imposed upon or sort of opened up beyond our grasp in a way that's quite fearful, I think, for many of us when we're practicing?
Yeah. So, like I was saying before, that any of these, if we go into concentration practice or mindfulness practice, that we're going to see all the other paramitas there. This one, I think, very central part of the practice is patience. So we talk about generosity. Maybe that's one aspect I've been talking about, but when we talk about patience, this is the aspect of what it means to, you moved, there you go, okay. I'm trying to look at you on the screen, which probably doesn't mean very much to you because you're up there, but the screen moves sometimes, so anyway. But in this case of the difficulties, and particularly the kind of difficulty of imposition and the fearfulness of having something push into our life. Right? This quality of awareness, which is about staying with something. Sometimes we translate the word patience as constancy. That's, some translators would say it that way, right? So it's not just like I'm waiting for something to be done with, right? I'm patient with it. But there is a constancy of heart. There's a constancy of awareness that is staying present. That's one aspect of compassion or of awareness, is that constancy. So when we're in that place where we're feeling those things that are going to come, how do we stay right there and aware? Becomes the practice, And it's exactly the same thing, removing the way in which we objectify those impingements, right? Whatever it is that's going to come in, the way we objectify them and they turn into a kind of weapon against us. We remove that, we remove that, we remove that, we remove that. By the way, that is the only way to make healthy boundaries. Right? Because you can talk this way and it can sound like, no boundaries, get rid of the boundaries, get rid of the boundaries, get rid of the boundaries. No, it means exactly the opposite. That you get strong, healthy boundaries with that kind of constancy and patience and presence with a world that can be very chaotic and full of all kinds of problematic things. Right? If you practice that constancy there, then there's a real boundary, not just an objectified wall, which you're kind of goes into your subconscious somewhere, and then when things start climbing over top of the wall, you get really anxious, right? Because you were like, there was a wall there, and I forgot there was even a wall there, but I was relying on the wall to keep those things out, and now you're startled because they're showing up. I would say this is one of the hardest things in practice, because we're so infuriated by having to be patient. If we read the commentaries in the by Shantideva on patience practice, it's like all about fire and anger. It's all just like over and over and over is about that. Now, I think underneath that you brought up there's fear, and that really needs tended to. But the fear can only be tended to if we stay present with the fire and the anger, right? The presence with the fire and the anger allows us to come to the fear and to treat it with tenderness. If we don't stay present with the anger and the fire, then we can never bring that tenderness to the heart that is afraid. That's my experience anyway.
I can see how I see in my own heart I get tripped up, I think, because I think when I make up the mental heart movement to think, okay, you haven't been doing the practicing thing, time to start doing some of the practicing thing. Mm-hmm. I feel active quality with that, mm-hmm. and then it feels as something moves and shifts in my world, it's required this active non-action, this attentive non-intention that we so often talk about. Mm-hmm. That is a kind of palpable shift, but also not really a shift. The whole game.
Yeah, you have to stay right against the wall. Our great ancestor Bodhidharma said to face the wall unwaveringly, and to see that the ordinary being and the sage are one and the same. This I think is one of the most profound teachings. Why we sit facing this direction is because traditionally we sit facing the wall, right? And when there's a lot of people in the room, you can't all be up against the wall. But like if you come for meditation in the morning, we sit around the side over here, and everyone's facing the wall. And that's in the honoring of Bodhidharma, facing the wall, right? And his teaching was that's what we're doing in Buddhist practice. Is we're facing the wall, a completely inescapable wall that goes in all directions. You could call it life, you could call it experience, you could call it your heart, you could call all kind of things. But to face that just unwaveringly, that's a raw deal. Like, that's not what we were signing up for. But that's patience, right? That you actually face that unwaveringly. But the medicine in that is that in that, although it seems so difficult and so kind of untenable to the part of us that doesn't want it to be like that, the medicine that is in that is that the ordinary being, the one that's deluded and ticked off about the whole situation, and the sage, the one that has overcome the suffering, the one that has the wisdom to see in this different way, they're not really apart. And we can know that in our own heart. And that's a place where that pain and difficulty, fear, and the relief of suffering commingle. They're not really separable. It's not that we just leave the suffering for the non-suffering. It's that the suffering and the non-suffering are together. Anyway, that's my story today.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks. Sangha.